So, I mean, he already introduced me. I could never do something as cool as he did, but hey, I'm Kelset. You probably know me by that name. And yeah, I'm a software engineer for Formidable Labs. I'm a maintainer for the main React Native repository. You may have seen me there. I've been one since basically January 2018. And since January 2019, more or less, I've become also one of the owners, which is like not really a great term, I think, but like that's what GitHub says, of the React Native community. And today I really want to try and share with you what my experience has been for about a year and a half, basically. You see, when I actually think about React Native and I think about like how my relationship with the community started, I sort of go into imagination mode. Like I just forget what I want to say, and I start thinking and dreaming. And I sort of think that my relationship has been basically the same one that a kid would have when living in a sea city. Like when you live and you go to the docks and you see all these massive vessels, and you're like, oh, wow, that's great. I would never go on those things. But, one can dream. And so what I would do is just draw and imagine all. And, well, like in reality, of course, I'm not a kid anymore. So what I did when I started being into the... Oop, is it working? Yeah, okay. Is basically, I started writing. Like, I couldn't help myself thinking that they were so massive. Anything was so big. And I didn't really feel that I could be like up to the challenge. I really felt that the only way I could provide any kind of usefulness back to this great community was to write. And, it was like a few years ago, so it was a Medium, which now can be a bit controversial because, Medium on the paywall and everything. But, it was the only way I could really see myself, trying to give back. And so I started writing an article, and then I just kept going. And it was great. Like, I would never have expected this to work. Like one of these articles, the Visual Studio Code one, which was the first one I wrote, was about code. Like, why anyone would care? But clearly, I was trying to help people similar to me, and that resonated with some people. Then over time, I started becoming an open source citizen, basically. So I started understanding how, for example, if you should write something, you should probably try to help with the website instead of writing like your own blog post, because it's more likely that people will see it if it's in the documentation. But still, I didn't feel like I was good enough. Like I felt really that I wanted to try and become a sailor. I wanted to try and board on a ship, but React Native was still too big. So back then, React navigation was in a bit of a weird spot. Like if you have been a developer for like a year and a half now, or like, no, it was almost 2 years ago. Probably you remember there was this dark phase in which the original maintainers sort of disappeared, and there was a couple of people, Spencer and Matt, that were trying to keep the boat afloat. And since they were, literally asking for help, I was like, you know what? I don't feel I'm still good enough to, help with the code, but I see that and I want to try and do, something else. So I started doing issue triaging, and so I started closing issues. Well, not just closing them, of course. I would reply and help with any, but then, eventually you close an issue. And then I kept closing, and I kept closing. And I thought, you know what? I found the right approach. I'm doing great. And then, basically, after 4 months, I totally out. Like, looking now back, it's like I was doing crazy. Like, I was checking the numbers, and I commented on over 900 issues in like 4 months. That's like, didn't have any idea what I was doing, and I literally burned myself to the ground. But that sort of kind of helped me. Like, after a couple months of being like, you know what, I'm done with open source, I got reached out by Hector, which is one of the the main engineers from Facebook that works on the open source aspect of React Native. And he asked me, you know what, do you want to help us? And I was like, well, I mean, I only know how to do thing, but why not? And so I boarded on the big vessel. And I started closing issues again. I mean, the thing where I literally felt that I wasn't in the way of like the good developers. Like I really felt that I could bring my experience from React navigation. Like I would like in the past year and a half since I started being a maintainer, I only commented on 500. And it really was a way for me to be around all these awesome developers without actually feeling I was like blocking them in any way. And this experience was really particular because at some point I went up to the main deck and looked around and I noticed something really weird, or like something I wasn't expecting. That basically there were two boats. I was like, what? And basically the reason for that is that, as you may be aware, like the React Native repository in open source is a mirror of the code they have internally at Facebook. And because of that, there were actually two boats, and there was a lot of manual work to keep them in sync. There was a lot of work to keep them together and sail across the ocean. And while this doesn't mean, like, React Native is still an open source project by all means, this introduced a couple of complexities, like, for example, the pipeline, sometimes when you open a PR, was a bit more complex. And sometimes things just happened, like new commits appeared, or you get a new engine released midway through the morning. You're like, oh, okay, this happened. But like, it's still like a really awesome open source project. But these kind of peculiarities made it so that we really felt on our ship, on the open source ship, that on the community ship, sorry, that we needed a better way. Those ropes weren't enough. We needed something more stable, something more of effect, impact. And so we introduced the discussion and proposal repository, which basically was the first step towards making those two boats closer and closer. And one of the main things that these repositories, triggered was that we realized that to help these two boats to sail better, to become, less complex, we needed to, sort of take pieces of them and create new ships of them. Like, we should make the boat smaller and make new ships out of them, and we can all sail together. And basically, this has become what is called now like the lean core effort, where basically a few components from the main React Native core repo have been moved to dedicated open source repositories in the React Native community organization. And so all of a sudden, it wasn't just our boat. It wasn't just the massive ship. It was like all these, ships sailing together. It was a fleet, basically. And it was great. And I mean, it's still great. We're seeing so many more people getting involved. But this also kind of challenged me because I really felt that I had to take a step back and change a bit my role. Okay, I've been a sailor now for, let's say, a year or something. I really felt that while this effort was leading towards a more sustainable future overall for the code base, because it would introduce, less complexities in making these components extracted, like the web view. Like, it was easier to get new releases. It was easier to merge PRs. I felt that it was time for me to take a step back and ask how and why we were doing this. But first, so it's almost 5 p.m. in the afternoon. You've been sitting all day. We already did some bit of gymnastics earlier, but I want to play a game. I hope you're excited. I am, because it's a stupid game, so I really hope you're in with me. Okay, the game is really, really simple. I'm going to show you some things, and they're going to have an emoji. If it's the thumbs up, you're going to say, woo! If it's the boo, if it's the thumb down, you say, boo. And if there's the third emoji, you decide. You can say, whoop or boo, okay? Let's try this. Okay, ready? Okay. Ready. We found the treasure! Woo! Yes, that's how I want it. But the pirates want us dead. I love this GIF, it's perfect. Jack Sparrow! Yeah, I'm not going to judge you for that reaction. But yeah, so let's keep the game going, but let me show you the map I've been drawing. You see, over time I've been trying to get more data, a better understanding on how things are going overall in React Native and in the React Native community. And I want to share with you some data that you may know, you may not know, but the core idea behind this data is that what I found out is that React Native is not sunsetting, is not dying, is here to stay. And I want to give you some numbers. Let's keep the game on. So here's the first piece of data about React Native. He has over 70,000 stars on GitHub. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, stars on GitHub. But it's still a better number than, let's say, NPM downloads, because those are flaky. There are 77,000 Android apps currently in the store. This number is massive. Can you think about it? It's crazy. Yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot. We were playing the game, right? And last one, and I swear, this is also a good one. There are almost 250,000 repositories in React Native, using React Native right now. Yeah. I mean, that's crazy. That's massive. It's such a massive number. And it really feels great for me to be here with you, because these are just a few numbers. If you have been involved or on Twitter mostly, you may have noticed companies like Microsoft, they have something around 30 apps currently in production using React Native, which is crazy. Valve, the gaming company, the new Steam chat app, it's in React Native. It's clear that we're not alone. It's not we're just, the cool dudes using it, and then everyone else outside is not using it. I don't know, for some reason, since the Airbnb article, I felt that there was a general distrust about React Native, and I wanted to reassure you, you're not alone. React Native is here to stay. But what about the React Native community? Okay, this is where I want to, because some data are really surprising. For example, there are almost 77,000 stars in the React Native community. It's almost as big as the main React Native repository. It's madness, right? Yeah. There are 71 repositories, of which 25 are from the Lean core effort. Can you imagine? Yeah. It's so much more responsibility and so much more swiftness, and we can do things faster. But there are 45 of these repositories that have only one maintainer. Yeah, right? I mean, of course, now I've sort of forced you into saying that, right? Hear me out. Why should you care? Why, right? Who cares? Isn't one maintainer enough? Well, maybe for if you have a side project, if you're on your own, you publish your own library on your personal GitHub account, maybe that's enough. But you see, being a maintainer in open source, it literally means having to do all those things. Usually, when you're a maintainer, you do that on top of a full-time job, or you've stumbled into the role. It's not something you're you know what, I'm going to do this full-time. Usually, it's something you take this responsibility upon you, and you want to do it good. You want to be good at what you're doing, and you want to be helpful. But as you can see, of course, in React Native in particular, even keeping up with the releases, and as the guy who does the releases, I know, when we did 60, even if we stayed, we communicated for 3 weeks to the library maintainers, hey, you know what, you should be ready for Android X. Some libraries weren't ready yet, and it's because sometimes it's really take a lot of effort to be always on top of React Native. And of course, you have to do review external PRs, do issue triaging, a lot of these things are really important, but at the same time, they're a lot of work. And of course, you could also be saying, well, I'm not a maintainer, why should I care? Well, let me tell you, in the React Native community, there are 70 repositories, and they're all here. And I just highlighted a few, but it's most likely like you have at least one of yours in one of these in your code base. And I mean, literally at least one, because the JSC is literally one running since 58. So you should care, because these libraries are affecting your code. And you could say, okay, there's a lot of work to do. All right, this code is the one I'm using. All right, yeah, it's React Native, so you know, everyone knows that React Native is the way it is. But maybe you've never been into a scenario like in the React Native fetch blob scenario, where like all of a sudden the maintainer just disappeared, literally, like from one day in September 2017, just disappeared. Well, that's really scary. Like all of a sudden you're relying a lot on this library and poof, it just disappears. I mean, you could say, well, that was a long time ago. Well, not really. Like they're finally moving to a fourth version, and I think in March they finally removed this line from the README. But imagine staying on a library for a year and a half that it's not being maintained just because the maintainer disappeared. It's not like out of it wanted to harm someone. It simply disappeared for whatever reason, and it's not cool when it happens. You may say, it's something that only happened once and it's not for everyone. But like, let's take another example. And I wanted to keep it real because like I've been bitten by these libraries before. And React Native push notification has like the best name ever. And we all know that push notifications are hard. But I mean, it's basically unmaintained too. Like they never reply to issues. And you could be like, well, why are you so harsh? Like that issue is open since May, like give them cut them some slack. Well, yeah, I would if it wasn't that I really opened the same issue in October 2017 and it's still not replied. So, these kind of things can happen. Like when you rely on a third-party library that it's only managed by one maintainer, because of all the things that needs to be done, you cannot exclude that this kind of scenario could happen. And I mean, it's not like it's something particular to React Native, it's something particular to, JavaScript. It's a really big problem in the whole open source world. Like, there's this awesome book written by Nadia Ekbal called Rodham Bridges, which is basically, it's 140 pages, but it's free. It's a PDF, you can download it for free. It's at the website of the Ford Foundation. But the core idea behind this book, which is like something you could have your CTO read, or CEO even, so it's not super technical, but the core idea is that open source, just like infrastructures, like road and bridges, need maintenance, need regular maintenance. And I mean, there are so many examples in that book about like why something may happen to an open source project. Like I've listed 3 here, but I'll only mention the first one, which is the OpenSSL, which you may know is a protocol that is used to secure communication over the web. This library was an open source project that before, in 2014, the Heartbleed bug was found by a researcher from a security team at Google. It was maintained by a guy in his spare time. Like, can you imagine, like a project that runs 2/3 of the web? It was maintained by one guy in his spare time. And it was simply because no one knew. And now, luckily, there are like 4 people working on it full time, but that's just one example. It's like the open source world is full of these issues. In particular, what could happen in the React Native community? I mean, here, like, you don't need to really see what is written there, but like the yellow that you see there is all the repositories that have only one maintainer. And why this can happen in the community? Well, I think that this boils down to 2 big issues. The first one is the governance issue, and the second one is the sustainability issue. Let me guide you through the first one. So governance. First off, let me take a step back. Why do we even need an organization in the first place? Well, 2 main reasons, to be honest. One is shared ownership. Basically, if you're a member, like literally in the GitHub organization, you're a member, you have right access to all the repositories. It means that you're a trustworthy person, and we trust that you're going to be able to jump on any of these repositories at any given point and help if help is needed, or if you feel like it. Like, oh, you know what? I see that this README has a typo. You can just go there, do a commit, and you can push it because you're a member, you're someone we can trust. And also, it really removes a part of the issue of like someone just disappearing. If someone disappears, well, it wasn't the person, it wasn't the gatekeeper. So we can just try to find someone new, help out. And the other aspect is the common tools. Like, for example, I don't know many of you use like GitHub organizations, but the .github is basically a specific kind of repository that allows to propagate a certain kind of files, which are called the community held files. So like the code of conduct, so like the issue templates across all the repositories. And by doing so, we can remove a portion of the responsibilities of the single maintainer because we already provide those things pre-baked. And also like, we have tools like React Native Bob, which is an awesome CLI tool that helps with creating third-party libraries in React Native, which is maintained by Satya, which is one of the best people in the React Native community. Or like even the Circle CI orb is basically a pre-baked setup for having a CI in your library. And of course, like we're even investigating actually having a proper template. So like when you create a new repository in the org, you're gonna have already all the files ready to use because we've created a template. And as you can see, there's a lot of extra value in having an organization. But how is the governance working right now? Well, it's not really. Like, I mean, it kind of is working, but usually the way it works is like this. Like, I open an issue or someone open an issue in the .github repository, and we just, propose something, and then you get some emojis reaction, and then you just wait. Literally, that's not good enough. Like, we should have some sort of level of governance of decision making so that we can proceed and we're not staling on some. I mean, even in this scenario, that's a really simple thing. Like, how can we define when to migrate a repository? And I mean, now I've sort of decided that that was good enough and we're going to go for it, but that's not the way it should work, right? And I mean, again, it's not just a problem for us. It's a problem that has been around forever. There is this awesome document called the Tyranny of Structurelessness. Sorry for my pronunciation. And basically what this quote is trying to say is that when you have a group of people and you don't have defined rules, those who know the rules will just use them at their advantage, or like they will use it in ways that, they can just bend them around. And the other ones are only gonna be confused. They're gonna stay in confusion or suffering for paranoid delusions. And that's true. Like, if you don't know what's going on, it's not like, well, I could read this and understand what's going on. You're just there hoping that something will happen. And this is, again, it's not really a cool thing. So what could we do? Like, we're proposing a few ideas for now. And I would love for you guys to help me find a good solution. But basically, the ideas that we're tossing around right now are like selecting a group that decides for everyone, and that could be an interesting idea, but you need to select those people. We could go for the rough consensus, which basically is what we're doing right now, which means unless someone has a really good reason for not wanting to do something, we can just go for it. Or, and this is an idea from Harry, which I think is in the room right now, and it was an idea based on the fact that we could have a voting system that would prioritize, decision-making based on, maybe donations. And actually, I mean, none of these are like a one-stop solution. It's going to work perfectly. But it surely is opening a lot of doors. And talking about money, let me switch to the second topic I wanted to talk with you about. Sustainability. Well, here's the thing about sustainability. When you don't have one, in open source in particular, at any given point, a maintainer could rightfully stop. Like, I mean, I've mentioned those extreme examples before, but like, when you use an open source software with a license, I'm 99.9999% sure that that license that you never read, did ya, says the software is provided as is, which basically means I have no responsibility in making your bug, work in my version. But this also means that you cannot impose anything on these people because usually they're working for free. There is no reason for them not to do it if they don't want to. And I've been in many conversations. A lot of these conversations I'm having with maintainers are always somehow around this problem of now I have, I need to focus on my daily job, or we're not using the repository anymore, so I don't really have any drive to keep, maintaining it because simply I don't use it. I don't care anymore about it. And the part that distresses me most about all of this is that usually when I do have these conversations, it's not with maintainers that have stopped. It's with maintainers that are just on the verge, but they don't want to stop, so they keep working. And this leads to, of course, overworking. And again, from previous experience, I can tell you that this is going to lead to mental health issues, or even burnouts. And I mean, this is something that touched me personally, and I really want to stress it. It's not good. This is not good. We shouldn't get to that point. So here's the big question. How can we ensure that the task of being a core contributor and a maintainer for a repository in the organization, in the React Native community, is not a stressful and negative experience while keeping said repository in a healthy state, given that, a lot of us are depending on it. The broader community this library is probably relevant for the community. How can we fix it, right? I mean, I love easy problems, apparently. But hear me out. We're discussing this kind of problem a lot in the last 6 months. So let me give you a brief overview of a few options that we've came to agree on. Well, one, we could reduce the workload per maintainer. And I mean, this is logic. If there's too much work, let's just introduce some more maintainers, get more CI, more CD, more bots into the repository. Let's try to reduce the amount of work that needs to be done. And yeah, that's sort of good. I mean, you're still not solving the issue of someone having to do this on top of their day job. So how about, let's introduce some money at the organization level. How about an open collective? Well, yeah, that could work, but in the Rodham Bridges, this hypothesis, this solution of going for an organization which gets money and then gives those money to the maintainers, as created in the past, in foundations like the Django one, what happened was that they weren't able to give the money to the maintainers, because if they did, then technically that company would have been not a non-profit, so not a charity, so they couldn't receive donations or anything like that. So basically, it's a really big mess. And also, how do you define who gets which amount of money? I mean, it's still an idea, but it has some cons. How about then, let's just move it to the personal level money influx. I mean, that's good, right? We have GitHub sponsors, we have Patreon. That could work, because, well, first off, you don't need to organize anymore, you get this amount of money. But at the same time, there's going to be an organic imbalance, because basically, if you're, let's say, a developer talking at conferences and, doing React Native releases, probably you get more attention and more drive towards you than someone who is simply one of the maintainers of the community. And that's not a good thing. So here's the fourth option, and this is actually the one I think it's more interesting overall. Let's introduce more stakeholders in the game. Let's have more companies adopting repositories in the organization, because, well, if they adopt it, well, first off, we can sort of ensure that there is going to be quality and consistency, because they, it wouldn't be that company that maintains that component that never works, right? And also, you would pay your developers to work on it. So we're removing the fact that one maintainer has to do it. And if that maintainer wants to leave, well, you're a company. You probably have another developer that is going to take that spot. You have a level of administration over the problem. that when it comes to interpersonal relationship in a non-working environment, it gets way more complex. And, well, this is the time. So I don't want to waste any more time of yours. So let me just finish up by saying that if you want to get involved, if this talk has touched you, has poked you, and you're like, oh, yeah, I should probably try to do something. Let me ask you this question. Who are you? Because if you're a company, I would really recommend that you start by doing what GoDaddy or CallStack are doing, where like they're actually adopting components from the React Native community, and it's really a great thing. Or you can go for the other route, which is like what we do at Formidable, what Futurist has been doing, of like paying your developers for the open source work that they do on top of their day job, which is a bit more complicated because you need to know your developers, you need to have clear rules of engagement. So like, okay, don't overwork, like you always need to pay attention to that. But instead, if you're an individual, please just reach out to the maintainer of the repo you use the most. Like I'm 100% sure that every single maintainer in the React Native community would love to see an issue open saying, hey, do you want some help? Like, I'll be able to introduce you. They're going to be able to help you out getting started. It would be great. And overall, if you're interested in these two specific problems, there's the .github repositories that I already mentioned. And that one is where we have two dedicated issues, one for the governance, one for the sustainability. If you want to leave a comment there, there's a better version of what I've just said there, so you can refer to it. I swear, I'm almost done. But let me just give you a quick PSA of why you should not do this. Well, first off, you should not do it for the money until we solve sustainability, because like there's this fake idea of like, oh wow, if you're an open source maintainer, you're the cool kid, and like everyone wants you, right? No, not really. Like if I have to make a graph of the money I've earned by doing open source and then have as an expense all the money I've spent in therapy. So yeah, just don't do it for the money until we solve sustainability. So please help us solve sustainability first. And also don't do it for the glory. Like if you're in for like, oh wow, I'm gonna be the greatest and everyone will love me. Yeah, basically the work is not as fun as you may think, so probably you'll just drop off in a month. Like I'm not trying to sugarcoat what the responsibilities are, but the other aspect of it is that if actually instead you want to use it as a way to get started in open source, the React Native community is a great place because there are a lot of people, a lot of things to do, a lot of easy to reach issues and things that can be done. And to conclude, and I swear this is the last one, is that why should you do it, right? Well, okay, so you don't get any money. You can do, like, you don't get any actual glory. Like, why would you do it? Well, actually, and this is where I get really cheesy, like, I can give you at least 70 good reasons to do it. Like, every single person I've met through the React Native community, and every single person I've also met, like, in the main repo, like, all the people from Facebook, the guys from Sony, Infinite Red, like, everyone I've met, it's been such a fulfilling experience. Like, the fact that I've been able to even be here with you today is, it's made possible by all of this that I've been doing, and it's the greatest thing ever to me, at least for now. At least, therapy, takes all my money. But that's not going to happen anytime soon if I'm good enough. No, but yeah, it really makes a lot of sense to me to say that literally, like, you should just do it because of these awesome people. And I'm sure this is something you never heard before, so I'm going to say it slowly. You ready? The real treasure is the friends that we made along the way. Thank you, everyone.